Hi, it's Mark from Top Local. We're here with Bernie Pawlik, Pawlik Automotive in Vancouver. We're talking cars. How you doing, Bernie?
I'm doing very well.
So we're going to talk about Porsche or Porsche. I guess it doesn't matter how you say it. How reliable are Porsche vehicles?
Well, I'd say overall they're quite reliable, considering that most of them are high-performance sports cars. Generally, they're quite reliable.
So they make quite a variety. Are they kind of consistent across all the different models they make?
Well, definitely not. There's quite a variety. So why don't let's look at a few different models. We'll start with the 911, the most popular, certainly the nicest models. I think, the reason you probably want to own a Porsche would be a 911. A fantastic car to drive, sporty, comfortable, and quite reliable, but not without problems. I mean, there are oil leaks that develop from the engines. Things like clutches will wear out a little faster probably than your average car because it's being driven hard. IMS bearings are an issue in the early 2000 era, so you need to know which models have those, and that's definitely a thing that needs to be fixed before it fails. But overall, I mean, for what the kind of car that they are extremely reliable.
So maybe before we journey into other models, what's an IMS bearing again?
An intermediate shaft bearing used on 911 engines, Boxsters, Caymans from late 1990s into late 2000s. This bearing is not lubricated by the engine and it does fail. We've done another blog on this. There's a lot of information on the web about this. If you own a 911 or a Boxster, you want to know about this bearing. You want to fix it before you ever hear a noise from it, because by the time you do, it's usually game over for your engine. I did find actually there's a lawsuit against Porsche over this issue too. So that's, again, something worth researching if you own one of these vehicles and you've had a problem with it. But it's basically, as I said, it's a bearing. It runs the intermediate shaft in the engine, and it's not lubricated by the engine. So eventually it fails and wears out, and it'll inject metal particles throughout your engine. And if you run it long enough, the shaft will break, or something will happen. The chains will break, and the engine just toast, which is a very, very expensive fix.
All right, with that happy news, how about Boxsters and Caymans? How are they for reliability?
Again, overall, they're pretty good. Again, the IMS bearing's a big issue for both of these vehicles. Caymans are a little newer, and they stopped using the IMS bearing after a while. But they, definitely like Boxsters. I mean, there's a few issues. I mean, one of the biggest things I can think of is the oil separator on the engine will fail after time, and it causes a lean condition. Check engine light. Sometimes the engine will start burning a lot of oil and smoking. And actually, speaking of smoking, I mean, that seems to be a common issue we see in a lot of Porsches. You start the engine up in the morning, it's cold, it blows out a puff of smoke. I mean, for the most part, I almost consider that to be normal on these cars. But sometimes once that oil separator fails, you'll get like a lot of smoke, so that you can tell there's a problem and something going on. But again, overall, they're, for what they are, the type of little sports car, they are quite reliable. Few issues again.
Sure. How about Cayennes? We see a lot of those around here in Vancouver. They're popular. How are they for reliability?
Well, that's one vehicle I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole, and I wouldn't recommend anyone buy one. There's a lot of issues with these vehicles. I mean, first off, they are a very nice vehicle, but the V8 engines, especially in the first generation, a lot of problems with coolant leaks. They use plastic coolant pipes under the intake manifold. A lot of these leak. Some to the point of even causing catastrophic engine failures if people let the engine overheat. But there's a lot of engine problems with these vehicles. My sort of gut feeling is Porsche kind of rushed these to the market and didn't really think things through. Again, a nice vehicle, but mechanically, from an engine perspective, not good at all. The transmissions and other areas are seem to be pretty well trouble-free, but the engine, which is your most expensive component usually, is not good. We haven't worked on a lot of the newer generation Cayennes in our shop, but I'm reading that there's a lot of engine problems with those as well. So it's a vehicle I would avoid.
All right. How about Panameras and Mayans? How are those for reliability?
We work on a few Panameras. They seem to be pretty well trouble-free from what we've seen, but they are all still fairly new. And McCann's, we haven't really worked on any of those. They're so new that we don't really see any at our shop yet. It's a nice little vehicle. I like the look of it with it's kind of like a small Cayenne, so nice little combination. But hopefully they're a lot more reliable than Cayennes. But overall, final thoughts on Porsche. They're a fantastic car, especially that in the 911. Caymans are real nice. Caymans and Boxsters are really nice too for what they are, and you can often get a Boxster for really low price. So make sure the IMS bearing's done or do it, and it's good preventative maintenance.
So let's just dig into that for just a second. Maybe IMS bearing renewal. What kind of price range are we looking at?
I'm thinking off the top of my head about a couple of $1,000, somewhere in there. And really the logical time to do it is when your clutch wears out. Now, unless you have an automatic, which then it won't happen, you've got to time it. So probably I'm taking a guess, maybe 70,000 kilometers. But even if I had a Boxster that was 5 years old or so, again in the range. So again, actually I got to rethink my math here because they haven't used the bearing since about 07, 08. So if we go back, every 5 to 10 years, it's probably worth replacing it, just, for no reason. But if your clutch wears out, that's the time to change the IMS bearing because you've already got the transmission and clutch out. So, it does add a little bit of money to the bill, but once it's out, much cheaper than having to deal with it later.
And sort of round it all up here, maybe Porsches are reliable. They have their own little unique issues. They might cost you quite a bit more for maintenance because it's a high performance car. You're going to drive it harder, so you should maintain it a little bit more religiously. Is that a fair?
I would say so. That's a good question, Mark. The oil change intervals on a Porsche are very long. Again, they're like the BMW, like 24,000 kilometers for a lot of newer ones, which I think is way too long. And most Porsche owners are car enthusiasts, so they're keen to change the oil more frequently. They're conscious of it. They want to take care of it. And so certainly I would probably do it every 12,000 at the most. They use good synthetic oils. They're large capacity oil systems, so they can handle a long oil change interval, but it's definitely worth doing more frequently. But yeah, when things go wrong with these cars, they're much more complex. So the cost is definitely higher than you would get with your average car.
So all that fun has a bit of a price.
Absolutely. But well
like
worth
life.
It. Yeah. Well worth it unless, you're getting into something like a Cayenne to me, which is a sport utility vehicle. And then there's a lot of other options. Whereas the 911, there's not a lot of competition. It's a very unique car. And, if you love it and you like it, which most owners do, they're willing to put up with some extra cost.
So there you go. If you have a Porsche in Vancouver and you want reliability, the guys to see are Pawlik Automotive. You can reach them at 604-327-7112. Get your IMS bearing changed today, or check out their website, pawlikautomotive.com. We've got a great podcast or cast about the IMS bearings and how they work in Porsches. Thanks, Bernie.
Thanks, Mark.